So I'm going to set my own timer for 15 minutes out of consideration here. It's a blessing and a curse to have a gift of the last presentation. I get to meet the challenge of trying to keep those of you who are still here and awake and on time. So if I fail at that, forgive me, but I'm going to do my best. Got my timer on right here. All right, so I'm also really pleased to share a little bit of perspective, a little bit of history on the Vermilion River Watershed Management Project, and talk a little bit about what we've come up with in terms of how we think about managing the watershed and the watershed management plan that's sort of in its final production right now. So I guess I'd like to sort of reflect back a little bit and share some perspectives. So go ahead. So the overview, we're going to zoom in and look at the Vermilion River watershed. You know, we've just kind of zoomed in on Edmonton here, and that was a great presentation. I got long on that. But heading east over to the prairie landscapes, looking at some of the focal challenges that really brought about sub-watershed management planning in the Vermilion, and then using kind of a filter that I developed thinking about key needs of watershed management to look at some of the strategies that we've come up with to address those. So real kind of high level look at some of those. And then I'll talk about the next steps towards plan completion and implementation. Okay. So towards the eastern end of the watershed, one of the larger sub-basins with almost less than 1% of the flow in the North Saskatchewan is the Vermilion River Basin, starting over northeast of Camrose and ending at the river Lee Park, northeast of Lloydminster. Go ahead. The Vermilion River Basin, well, this map may look bumpy. Thank you, Candace, for this map. It's in the discussion paper. The entire elevation difference is about 225 meters compared to, I don't know how many thousand for the North Saskatchewan. And there's everything from fairly flat agricultural lands in the headwaters to rolling hills and deep valleys as you go through. It's a very beautiful landscape if you haven't visited. Go ahead. So the filter that I've talked about identifies kind of key needs and what brings about watershed management planning. So often there's a challenge, some kind of water management challenge, watershed management challenge that is identified. It might be just drought, it might be excessive flooding. And as a result of this challenge, people realize that the tools they had in place can't meet that need of addressing that challenge. And so there's a mandate that ideally comes forward to go forth and deal with this, pool your resources and align your abilities and go about doing it. So that mandate it can come from leaders in different positions, and we're really fortunate to have the Water for Life policy in 2003, at least at a very strategic level, give the idea of how watershed management planning could happen. Of course, there's challenges going from the mandate part to support, where there's actually full implementation capacity to do that. So anyway, so the support is sort of one of the needs in order for watershed management to work. Understanding, both in terms of public understanding as well as the scientific tools to be able to make appropriate decisions and look at things in context. And the capacity is the other need, the ability of our communities to actually be able to understand and deliver on this. So that's the filter I'll be using. You'll see how it works in the Vermilion. Go ahead. So, in terms of thinking about the Vermilion watershed, I guess there's 5 kind of challenges which we turned also into goals that are connected to our overall goals that we identified in the discussion paper. But one of the challenges is the level of knowledge and the level of capacity to work on water management questions within the Vermilion. Historically, there's been both highs and lows out in the Vermilion. During high flow periods, during flooding, there's often flooding damage. We had, I think, probably the largest dam failure in the province of Alberta happened in 1974 at the Vermilion Dam. There's been other small ones, but I think that's the largest one. One of them. Anyways, there's not been a lot of them, but that came as a result of 1974 flood. There's also been experience of real drought and emergencies in terms of water supply, and that have brought up a lot of supply issues. Water quality is a huge concern, and the level of knowledge about water quality is a big part of that concern. Likewise, people really gravitate towards understanding, wanting to know about fish and the aquatic ecosystem, that kind of thing. How are the riparian areas and wetlands doing? But we also have limited or fragmented knowledge about that. And most of the rural population is still on groundwater for their core supply. Some of the urban areas now have the Alberta Central East line coming down Highway 16, but in the rural areas, groundwater, and in Vermilion as well. So groundwater quality and quantity is a huge concern, a huge challenge. Okay. So, as the steering committee, we chose to look at this. I'll get into who that is in a moment. Chose to look at this in an integrated way, though. We wanted to think about cause and effect. We wanted to think about how these different issues were connected to each other, and use the knowledge that was available to us to try and develop recommendations that would address things in concert and not cause more issues as we're going about resolving issues. Okay. So some of the challenges that I've identified there, they're connected in multiple ways to a few key activities. One of them is wetland drainage, and you're aware that wetland drainage is an issue across the Canadian prairies, where in order to make productive use of land, we've chosen to drain over 70% of our wetlands, some spots much higher, these real hot spots. And so, at the farm level, you might not notice an effect, but as you scale up to the watershed, there can be many real problems that come both in terms of quality of water, the quantity of water, the floods, and then the droughts that follow. The aquatic ecosystem suffers, groundwater issues suffer. So this one activity is connected to a whole bunch of issues across that issue map that we looked at. So go ahead. So I'm not going to dwell on the slide, but there's a variety of types of drainage impacts that happen across the watershed, focused in the headwaters in the upper part of the basin above Vegreville. Okay. Now, talk about dry years. This is a dry year hydrograph. You can't really see the numbers, but about 2.7 is about the peak flow at the most flow, 2.7 cubic meters a second near Marwing, down in the lower part of the basin. And a lot of the year there's hardly any flow at all. It's a real trickle. If you move to the next slide, the wet year hydrograph is up above 47, 48 cubic meters a second in the same place. So the scale going from very dry to very wet can happen within a year, within 2 years, and we definitely get that non-stationarity thing because there is no average here. There's no predictability and no average, and the kind of extremes you see in the main stem, we get much higher here. So there's all sorts of implications of that for the aquatic ecosystem, for water quality, for supply once again. This issue of flow is connected to everything else. Okay. So how we went about meeting the challenge, I guess here's a bit of the narrative. Back in 2003, as Water for Life was being developed, there was also the Ag Policy Framework with the federal government, provincial government, and Alberta North America Waterfowl Management Plan, NAWA, saw an opportunity to kind of link these at a sub-basin scale and say, how can we layer things so that we actually have some ground to stand on, some funding support, various things. So they brought forward an idea. Came Dennis Dilly at some point, and during the same time, the Northeast Alberta Water Management Coalition, here, just hold back one more. Yeah, thanks. That's just the first bullet. So, yeah, perfect. So, the Northeast Alberta Water Management Coalition also had water supply concerns and flooding concerns. This came together by 2008 with an agreement to go partner on watershed planning. So at the beginning of 2009, second bullet, we struck a steering committee composed, over half of which came from rural municipalities and urban municipalities in the basin, as well as a number of other agencies who had a say. So Alberta Environment Water Management Operations has been there, Lakeland College, an advisory committee on flow management in the watershed, Help me, Candace.
Vermilion River operation.
Got it. Yeah. And, oh, Holden Drainage District, that's the other one. I could look over and saw Al, and yeah. And I should mention, representing NSWA there, and just the champion of everything Vermilion has been Candace Mannon, and I don't think this project would have been possible at all without you. So I wanted to say that. So anyways, integrating science and understanding with public involvement to understand the issues and develop recommendations. A mouthful. We've spent the last 4 years grappling with issues, developing recommendations. Last fall we came out with a discussion paper similar to North Saskatchewan, and we were just in final development of the watershed management plan in parallel. So the next phase is really reaching out, building support, building capacity. Okay? 5.5 minutes left. Okay, click again. Okay, cool, good enough. Then just briefly, this is kind of our map of the universe in terms of who's involved. I won't go into details, but all in yellow, those groups are at the table at the steering committee. The bottom row is all the, I guess, grounded locally, all the local municipalities involved, and then other agencies that are connected. Okay? So the planning process, building partnerships in 2009, characterizing the watershed, understanding the issues, 2009-2010, developing goals and the solutions, excuse me, and recommendations for implementation, okay? All right, so here's the preview now, and I'm not following the structure of the plan, so those of you who have seen it can forgive me a little bit, I hope. But I wanted to think a little bit about these themes of support, understanding, and capacity as we look at the what's in the watershed management plans. This is a little bit of a preview of it. So the vision that we initiated back at the beginning of our planning was a healthy and sustainable watershed, Vermilion River watershed. And how that translates into what we have in this final document is how do we support clean, reliable water and healthy aquatic ecosystems? How do we get there? That's kind of the mission of this document to help empower. So similar to the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance, IWMP, we developed 5 goals for community understanding and capacity. That's somewhat similar to your goal 5 about alignment, but it's our number 1. Surface water supply, quantity, surface water quality, aquatic ecosystem health, and groundwater. So all those goals are articulated in the discussion paper, and they stand. What we've tweaked as we've gone through is sort of the recommendations that are the management directions, which are like themes of work to accomplish these, and specific actions. We used the feedback over the last few months to really fine-tune and develop and really also flesh out the narrative about why these are important. So we really tried to connect to what is our intent with having these recommendations in here. And we hope that's reflected in the final plan that's forthcoming. The other thing that we did was change lead to be who's involved. So who has the jurisdiction and who has the expertise to be involved in the working groups to carry out these actions. And that's kind of the suggestion that we're connecting. Okay? So in the support side of it, what we envision is that community leaders, organizational leaders are aligning their efforts, resources, all their tools to implement policies that are supportive of the watershed collectively and remove the things that aren't supportive, I guess, is the other aspect. So some of the themes of work that stretch across all the recommendations, the kind of the unified themes are, for instance, working with the municipalities to integrate recommendations into municipal government planning and decisions and aligning that work across the watershed. So there's a couple of actions related to that. Developing objectives for water quantity, water quality, and aquatic ecosystems, and incorporating those into decision making where appropriate about approvals, licenses, land use, applications, various different things. There's different authorities that have the ability to use objectives. And improving regulatory compliance and enforcement is another key one. And this comes out of a concern is that we're having ongoing wetland loss and ongoing riparian degradation, and we don't know how to stop the bleeding. So this is what the community has told us, and this is really, really important to carry forward. So those are kind of support themes that run across all of the goals. Go ahead. So just thinking about partnerships, in the Alberta Water Strategy, we have government, Alberta Water Council, watershed stewardship groups, and watershed planning and advisory councils. And sort of a bar running across all of these that isn't as explicitly named, but the role of municipalities in the partnerships at the local level is critical. And I don't see any of this going forward without a really strong local municipal partnership that can actually carry out the actions and align their efforts. Okay. So understanding. So building understanding and informing decisions, we had to come to a common understanding ourselves as a steering committee about what the issues were, what the cause and effects were, etc. And we also utilized some great science. Dr. John Pomeroy from the University of Saskatchewan has been working with us and just is finalizing a report on actual effects of wetland loss on hydrologic function. What happens when you drain it, what happens when you restore it. We have some of the finest scale modeling done on wetlands that's scaled up to the whole headwaters of the Vermilion to help inform our understanding of wetlands as one of those kind of connecting themes for all the issues. So one of the things that we've been working on, thanks to support from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, is developing a monitoring system to better understanding watershed conditions. And that details what issues can we understand, what indicators should we understand them with, and what is some efficient targeted means to gain water quality in aquatic ecosystem, groundwater information. Using scientific tools, modeling, conservation targeting, for instance, to support decision making about land use planning and water management, and broad extension, education, and watershed awareness activities. So building understanding for us involves these kind of really big three things, and you'll see that throughout the document that we keep on using this approach. Okay. So tools for understanding what's going on, the monitoring, how is it working? That's where some of the modeling can be helped to check our understanding and test ideas about how it could work. And that's the what if we do this or that, the scenario analysis. And that's been very informative. What would be the effects of draining all the wetlands in a certain area or restoring just certain kinds of wetlands? Dr. Pomeroy's work has really helped us with that. And of course that connects underlying to the objectives, tracking what's going on, the adaptive management as we try things out and learn from our experiences or mistakes. Okay? And finally, the capacity, which I put last here, but it is our #1 goal in here. We envision that our community has the ability to understand and manage the watershed. You know, what does this mean? So the first thing that comes about is initiating an implementation team that can develop partnerships and align skills and resources to implement these actions. That's our #1 action in the document. And then something that shows up quite a bit as we go through goals 3, 4, and 5, promoting beneficial management practices across multiple sectors by aligning and improving education, extension, and incentive programs. That's an example of a theme that can be used across multiple areas, and we've got specific areas where different groups can apply on it. Okay? So that's kind of a teaser about some of the themes that we've grappled with. I hope it was informative, but the next steps, right now Susan Abels, who's done extensive work with us, is crafting our wordy and bullety kind of recommendations into a beautiful piece of writing that speaks to the level of interest and narrative that the community wants to see. We want a compelling document that carries this feeling forward that I've tried to convey today. So she's crafting that right now. We'll have the recommendations and implementation strategy drafted by the end of the week. And our steering committee is going to be considering this next week and saying, are we ready to endorse these recommendations to go back to our organizations and begin the final publishing and implementation of this plan? So we're approaching a major milestone right now. Following that, we'll complete kind of the compiling and packaging of it and get it out for publishing this summer, and establishing the implementation team and the kickoff of the implementation by later on this summer.